Tonight you find yourself standing in a quiet, forgotten gallery. Dust motes dance in the single beam of moonlight slanting through a high window, illuminating a strange object under glass. It is a cruel-looking tangle of iron and leather, complex and menacing. This is where our story begins, with a myth made of metal and fear. Are you ready to trade tonight's anxieties for yesterday's romance and the truth that lies behind the legends? So, before you close your eyes, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time is it there? Now settle in, and let's drift back to a time when love was written by candlelight. Your eyes adjust to the dim light of the imagined museum, focusing on the artifact before you. It is called a Florentine girdle, or more commonly, a chastity belt. The name itself sends a shiver through the air, a whisper of possession, of mistrust made manifest. You can almost feel the cold weight of it, the unyielding nature of the forged iron shaped into a cage. It is ornate in its own brutal way, with traces of velvet lining, now faded to a ghostly brown, meant to protect the skin from the constant, unforgiving chafe of the metal. You trace its form with your gaze, the complex lock mechanism at the front, the hinges at the side, the way it was clearly designed to be worn, to be endured. The story that accompanies this object is one you've likely heard before, in jest or in a sensationalized film. It's a tale as enduring as any fairy tale. A noble knight, his heart full of piety and purpose, prepares to depart for the Crusades. His journey to the Holy Land will be long, arduous, and fraught with peril. He may be gone for years if he returns at all, and as he kisses his young wife goodbye on the cold stone steps of his castle, he entrusts her not to her own virtue, but to the blacksmith's craft. He fastens this very device around her, turns the key in the intricate lock, and places that key on a chain around his own neck. He'd pack his sword, his shield, and the key to his wife's honor, presumably on the same key ring as the one for the castle treasury. A rather grim symbol of matrimony. You can picture the scene so vividly. The lady, clad in silk and samite, left to wander the lonely halls of the keep, a prisoner in her own home, in her own body. Her husband fights for God in a distant land, while she is left to fight a daily battle with discomfort, with indignity, with the cold, constant reminder of his suspicion. Every rustle of her skirts is accompanied by the faint, dull clink of metal on metal. Every movement is a negotiation with her iron bonds. It is a powerful, deeply romantic, and terribly tragic image. The ultimate symbol of a dark and unenlightened time, a period we so easily label as the Dark Ages, a time of brute force, where a man's will was law, and a woman's body was little more than property to be secured. You let your mind drift with this narrative, to feel its pull. It speaks to something primal, jealousy, the fear of betrayal, the desperate need to control what we cannot see. The story seems to fit so perfectly with our vision of the medieval world, a world of towering castles with damp, windowless dungeons, of plagues and punishments, a world where life was harsh and short. The chastity belt feels like a natural piece of that grim puzzle. You imagine the hushed gossip of the serving maids, the pitying glances of the castle steward, the lady's lonely vigils in the chapel, praying for her husband's return, and perhaps for the freedom that only his key could grant. But history, like a whispered secret, is rarely so simple or so cruel. As you stand here, in the quiet of this mental space, a gentle question begins to form. Let your analytical mind, the one you use in your waking hours, gently stir. Consider the practicalities for a moment. Not the romance, not the drama, but the simple, mundane reality of it. Think of sanitation, of hygiene, in an age that already struggled immensely with such things. The constant friction, the impossibility of true cleanliness. The consequences would have been dire, leading to infections and illnesses that no lord would want to return home to. It's a rather significant design flaw, not exactly designed for comfort, or for, well, anything resembling a normal Tuesday. And what of the lady herself? Was she truly so powerless, so bereft of allies? What of the blacksmith who made the device? It is a complex piece of engineering. Surely a clever locksmith, perhaps for the right price, could fashion a duplicate key. Or even more simply, a sturdy set of tools could break the lock or pry open a hinge. The idea of a single, irreplaceable key carried across continents seems more like a plot device from a novel than a practical security measure. A far cry from simply sharing a password for a streaming service, this was a different level of account security, and one with some very obvious workarounds. Now look closer at the object again. Let your historian's eye take over. The craftsmanship, the intricate scrollwork on the metal, the specific design of the lock. Does it truly look like something forged in the crude smithy of a 10th century castle? Or does it perhaps look a bit more refined, a bit more modern? The verifiable historical detail that begins to unravel this entire tapestry is that the overwhelming majority of surviving chastity belts, the very ones that sit in museums and fuel these dramatic tales, have been scientifically dated, and they are not from the time of the Crusades. They are not medieval at all. Most are from the 18th and even the 19th century. This single fact hangs in the air, changing the very atmosphere of the room. The object on its velvet pedestal is no longer a relic of medieval oppression. It is something else entirely. A fabrication, a joke, a piece of medical quackery from a much later time. The story of the noble crusader and his locked-up lady begins to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. The iron girdle is still there, solid and real, but its story, its very identity, is suddenly in question. It feels less like an artifact of a brutal past, and more like evidence of a long-running misunderstanding. One can only imagine the conversations that led to its creation centuries after its supposed use, and the stories it was made to tell. The myth, it seems, may be far more interesting and more complex than the cold iron itself. The air in the gallery seems to shift. The moonlight catches a newly imagined plaque next to the iron girdle, its engraved letters clearing up the confusion. The date is not 1190, but 1890. The place of origin is not a castle in the Levant, but a workshop in London or Paris. The object is not a tool of a crusading knight, but a fantasy, a forgery, created for the eager eyes of a world far removed from the one it claimed to represent. The story you thought you knew has collapsed, and in its place, a new, more curious tale begins to unfold. To understand the myth, you realize you must leave the Middle Ages behind, for now, and travel forward in time. Let your consciousness drift first to the 15th century, to the vibrant, innovative world of the late Renaissance. You find yourself in a scholar's study, filled with books and strange mechanical drawings. You are looking over the shoulder of a man named Conrad Kaiser as he completes his famous manuscript on military technology, Belle Fortis. Among the sketches for trebuchets, cannons and diving suits, you see a peculiar drawing. It is, unmistakably, a chastity belt. The text describes it as a device worn by the women of Florence, a city known for its wealth, and apparently, its jealous husbands. But as you observe the context, the tone of the work, you sense something is amiss. It's presented with a wink and a nod. This isn't a documentary sketch, it's social commentary. The illustration was likely met with a knowing chuckle, the 15th century equivalent of a forwarded meme about an overprotective spouse. It was satire, a joke about how possessive and untrusting some men could be. It was never meant to be a blueprint. The idea, however, once planted, had roots. It lay dormant for centuries, a curious footnote in a book of war machines, occasionally surfacing in bawdy plays or comedic poems as a symbol of extreme jealousy. But it was not yet the grim artifact of history we imagine. For that, you must let your mind travel forward again, past the age of enlightenment, past revolutions and reason, into the heart of the 19th century. Now, you are breathing in the air of Victorian London. It smells of coal smoke, damp wool, and the faint, sweet scent of perfume. You are walking through the Great Exhibition, or perhaps the private museum of a wealthy industrialist. The Victorians were voracious collectors. They filled their homes and public halls with artifacts from around the globe and throughout history, driven by a new and passionate interest in the past. This was the age of archaeology, of digging up forgotten worlds, and also the great age of romanticizing them. They were particularly obsessed with the Middle Ages, which they viewed as a time of profound faith, chivalric honor, and fascinating barbaric cruelty. And so, they went looking for it. Antiquarians, both professional and amateur, scoured Europe for relics. This created a booming market, and where there is a market, there are always suppliers. A clever blacksmith with a bit of theatrical flair and a knowledge of popular history could age a piece of iron in a few days, burying it, treating it with acid, giving it a 1,000-year-old backstory for the right price. And what did these Victorian collectors want more than anything? Objects that confirmed their vision of the past. They wanted swords wielded by knights, goblets used by kings, and most thrillingly, instruments of torture and control. This is where our iron girdle finds its true home. It wasn't forged in a drafty medieval castle. It was likely hammered into shape in a 19th century workshop to satisfy a 19th century appetite. You can almost picture the scene. A gentleman in a top hat and frock coat, peering at the newly acquired object in his study. He sees it as proof of his own enlightened age. "Look how far we've come," he might say to his guests. "See how brutally they treated their women in the so-called Age of Faith." It was a way for the Victorians to congratulate themselves on their own progress, their own civility. This specific social custom, the obsessive collecting of historical oddities, became a mark of status. To have a Roman coin was good. To have a sarcophagus was better. But to have a genuine medieval chastity belt, that was a conversation piece unlike any other. It was shocking, titillating, and it reinforced all their preconceived notions. They were a people who would cover the legs of a piano for modesty's sake. So the idea of a locked-up lady, however mythical, was both horrifying and deliciously thrilling to them. It spoke directly to their own deeply repressed anxieties about desire and female fidelity. Just as we saw in the previous section, the story of the Crusader was essential to this fantasy. Victorian novels and paintings were filled with these romantic tales. Sir Walter Scott's Ivanhoe had reshaped the public imagination, and everyone wanted a piece of that chivalric world. The chastity belt provided a tangible, physical link to that fantasy. It was a prop for the story they were already telling themselves. The fact that no such device is ever mentioned in actual Crusader chronicles, in household accounts, or in the thousands of surviving medieval letters and legal documents was an inconvenience that was easily overlooked. The myth was simply too good, too potent, to be ruined by a lack of evidence. So the objects were made, bought, and displayed. They entered the collections of esteemed museums in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, often without rigorous examination, labelled as medieval. It was only with the advent of modern scientific analysis in the mid-20th century that the truth began to emerge. Metallurgists and historians looked closer and found that the construction techniques, the types of screws used, the very composition of the metal, were all wrong for the Middle Ages. They were, however, perfectly consistent with the 19th century. The fantasy began to unravel. The Victorians, it seems, were not just looking at the past. They were looking in a mirror, seeing their own anxieties dressed in medieval armour. Their society was famously restrictive, governed by unspoken rules and a rigid code of conduct, especially for women. The chastity belt, a fiction of extreme physical restraint, was perhaps a way for them to process their own world of extreme social and psychological restraint. By projecting this ultimate act of control onto a darker past, they could explore their own fears without having to confront them directly. The myth of the iron girdle says very little about the reality of medieval life, but it speaks volumes about the dreams and nightmares of the Victorian age. The cold iron in the display case is not a key to understanding the 12th century, but a window into the soul of the 19th. So, if the iron girdle is a Victorian fantasy and a Renaissance satire, what was the truth? If a knight didn't lock up his wife, what were the real constraints on love, desire, and marriage in the age of chivalry? To find out, you must let the smoky air of 19th century London dissolve, leaving the museums and their forgeries behind. You travel back, further this time, to the world they were trying to imitate. You are standing now, not in a gallery, but on the cold flagstones of a great hall in a 12th century castle. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke from the central hearth, roasting meat, and the faint, earthy scent of the hounds sleeping on the strewn rushes at your feet. This is the world that birthed the legends of King Arthur and the chivalric code. But the reality of life and love here is far more pragmatic, and in its own way, just as restrictive as any iron cage. You see a young girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, with her hair in 2 long braids. She is the daughter of the lord of this castle, and she is already a piece on a political chessboard. You watch as her father meets with a neighbouring baron. They are not discussing fairy tales or poetry. They are talking of land, of alliances, of consolidating power. In this world, a daughter's hand was one of the most valuable political assets a father possessed. Her marriage could end a feud, secure a border, or bring a much-needed infusion of wealth into the family coffers. Her feelings on the matter are not a factor. She is not asked her opinion, nor is the young boy, the son of the other baron, who she will one day be contracted to marry. Love is not part of the equation. In fact, romantic love as a basis for marriage was seen as an unstable, even irresponsible reason to form a union. It was a flimsy, fleeting emotion, while land was eternal. Falling in love with the wrong person wasn't just frowned upon. It was a logistical nightmare that could disrupt alliances and landholdings for generations. Stability was the goal, and marriage was the primary tool for achieving it. You drift forward a decade. The young girl is now a woman, perhaps 17. Her wedding day approaches. You witness the final negotiations. Her family is preparing her dowry, a payment of money, land, livestock, or goods that she will bring to the marriage. It is a crucial part of the contract, reflecting her family's status and wealth. In return, the groom's family establishes the dower. This was a vital provision for her security. A portion of her husband's lands and income, traditionally 1/3, that would be hers to live on if he were to die before her. These were not romantic gestures. They were legal and financial transactions, recorded on thick, durable parchment with the scratch of a quill. The wedding ceremony itself is less about the two individuals and more about the two families. It is a public affirmation of the new alliance. You see her standing in the cold stone chapel, her hand placed in the hand of a young man she has met only a handful of times. The first time a bride and groom might meet could be at the altar, which certainly streamlined the awkwardness of early courtship. She is dressed in the finest brocade her family can afford, not in white, which was not yet the traditional colour for weddings, but in a deep blue or rich red, decorated with fur and embroidery to display her wealth. As the priest recites the Latin rite, you try to imagine her thoughts. Is she afraid? Hopeful? Resigned? Her duty is clear: to be a good wife, to manage the vast and complex household of her new husband's castle, and, most importantly, to produce heirs, preferably male, to continue his lineage and inherit the lands that have just been joined. A kind husband was a blessing, a bonus, but not a guarantee. Companionship might grow, and a quiet, respectful affection could develop over years of shared life and responsibility. But passionate, soul-stirring love, that was the stuff of minstrel songs, not the bedrock of noble society. Yet even in this world of strict contracts, human emotion found ways to complicate things. The church, for its part, was more concerned with the sacrament and the saving of souls than with whether the couple had much to talk about over dinner. And this led to a fascinating and often chaotic social custom. The church taught that a marriage was made not by a priest or a ceremony, but by the freely given consent of the two people involved. This led to the practice of betrothal de presenti, or a clandestine marriage. If a man and a woman, alone in a garden or a quiet room, exchanged vows in the present tense, I take you, Eleanor, to be my wife, and I take you, William, to be my husband. Then in the eyes of God and canon law, they were legally and irrevocably married. No witnesses were needed. No priest, no parental permission. It was a loophole in the system, a way for personal choice to assert itself. But it was a dangerous one. Imagine a younger son with no inheritance whispering these words to a wealthy heiress, or a girl, promised to a powerful old duke, secretly pledging herself to a handsome but landless knight. These secret vows could throw carefully constructed alliances into utter chaos, leading to furious families, lawsuits that could drag on for years in ecclesiastical courts, and accusations of trickery and abduction. It was a testament to the power of love, or perhaps ambition, to defy the rigid structures of the time. So, the control exerted over a noblewoman was not a physical lock and key. It was a web of expectations, duties, and contracts. Her honour and reputation were paramount because they directly impacted her family's standing and the legitimacy of her children. Her life was circumscribed not by iron, but by the invisible walls of lineage and obligation. Her fidelity was expected not just as a matter of personal morality, but as a matter of political and dynastic security. An illegitimate child could throw the entire line of succession into question. This was the true girdle of the medieval noblewoman: her name, her family, and the future of the estate she had been married into. One can only imagine the silent burdens and secret hopes carried within the hearts of these women, whose lives were mapped out for them before they could even write their own names. The great hall, with its talk of contracts and dowries, fades from view. The air grows warmer, softer, scented with roses and lavender from a walled garden. You have moved from the public sphere of politics and power to the private, intimate world of the court. If marriage was a transaction of property, where did the heart go to find solace? If love was a liability in a noble union, where did all that human yearning find a voice? You are about to witness the answer, a beautiful and elaborate fantasy designed to flourish in the very spaces left empty by pragmatic matrimony. This is the world of courtly love. Remember the young bride from the chapel, her future sealed by a dynastic pact. Let your mind see her again, years later. She is now the lady of her own great castle, a respected chatelaine, a mother to heirs. Her marriage is a success by every measure of the time. It is stable, prosperous, and dutiful, but it is also devoid of the poetry and passion she hears in the songs of the visiting troubadours. And it is she, now a powerful and admired figure, who has become the object of a new kind of devotion. You see a young, landless knight in her husband's service. He never speaks to her of his feelings directly. He would not dare. Instead, he speaks a new, elegant language of love that was sweeping through the courts of southern France and beyond. This phenomenon, which scholars would later call courtly love, or finamores in the Occitan language of the troubadours, was a revolution of the heart. It proposed a radical idea, that love was not a comfortable domestic affection, but a transcendent, ennobling, and often painful passion. And its natural home was not within marriage, but outside of it. The ideal lady was, conveniently, almost always married to someone else, preferably a powerful, busy, and slightly oblivious lord. She was placed on a pedestal, a quasi-divine figure to be worshipped from afar. You watch as the young knight enters a tournament held in the fields outside the castle walls. Attached to the crest of his helmet is a silk scarf, a favour given to him by his lady. He fights with a reckless bravery, not for land or for riches, but for her honour. Every victory he wins is laid at her feet. His devotion is a public performance. He wants the whole court to see who inspires his valour. In return, she might grant him a nod, a brief, fleeting smile that he will treasure for weeks, replaying it in his mind. It is a delicate and intoxicating game of gestures. This code of love originated in the sophisticated, sun-drenched courts of Aquitaine and Provence in the 12th century, nurtured by powerful and educated women like Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter, Marie de Champagne. It was they who patronized the poets and singers who spread these new ideas. A man named Andreas Capellanus even wrote a whole treatise on the subject, De Amore, a sort of dummy's guide to adoration, which laid out rules for would-be lovers. And these rules were startling. One of the most famous dictates, "Marriage is no real excuse for not loving," explicitly separated the legal bond of matrimony from the sublime experience of true love. The knight in this system was expected to suffer beautifully. He would swear an oath of fealty to his lady, becoming her vassal in love, just as he was her husband's vassal in feudal law. He was expected to grow pale, lose his appetite, and spend sleepless nights composing poetry praising her beauty, her wisdom, her cruelty, in not immediately rewarding his love. It was a very dramatic and very public form of private devotion. His suffering was proof of his sincerity. It was this trial by fire, this unrequited longing, that would purify his spirit and make him a better man, a more courageous knight, a more virtuous soul. The entire affair was meant to be a secret, yet it was a secret everyone seemed to know about. The tension between the private emotion and the public performance was part of its thrill, and it was, in theory, almost always chaste. The love was in the longing, not in the consummation. It was a longing that fueled art, poetry, and heroic deeds. To possess the beloved would be to end the exquisite torture that made the love so potent, so ennobling. It was a way to feel everything, while risking almost nothing. This elaborate game sometimes took on the form of a fascinating social custom, the so-called courts of love. While likely more of a literary trope than a regular event, the stories tell of gatherings where the great ladies of the court would preside over debates on romantic dilemmas. They would hear cases and pass judgment based on the intricate rules of courtly love. A knight might ask, is it possible for true love to exist between a husband and wife? The court, guided by the principles of Finamores, would almost certainly rule against it. Another might ask, what is love's greatest tragedy? The death of a lover or their infidelity? Hours could be spent in spirited, elegant debate over such questions. These courts were a way to explore the complex emotional landscape of love in a safe, intellectual, and highly stylized environment. You can now see the medieval world of romance in a new light. It is split in two. On one hand, you have the hard reality of marriage, a public contract for land and lineage. On the other, you have the shimmering fantasy of courtly love, a private devotion for the heart and soul. It was a necessary fiction. It provided an outlet for the emotions that the social structure of marriage had no place for. It gave both men and women a script for experiencing romance, desire and admiration without threatening the bedrock of society. The unattainable lady of the castle, admired from afar, was not imprisoned by an iron girdle, but she was still constrained. Her power in the game of courtly love was immense, but it was a power that existed within a gilded cage of its own, a cage of idealized perfection that she was expected to inhabit. One can only imagine the quiet satisfaction of a woman valued in her marriage for her womb and her dowry, being valued in courtly love for her wit, her grace, and her very soul. The tournament grounds grow quiet, the echoes of applause and the clash of steel fading into the gentle hum of the evening. The game of courtly love, with its public displays and unspoken rules, can only go so far. A shared glance across a crowded hall or a scarf tied to a helmet can sustain the soul for a time, but the human heart eventually craves something more tangible, a more personal confirmation. But how did this game of silent glances and public deeds find a more personal voice in a world with no concept of privacy, where a lady was always attended and a knight always observed? You are about to discover the art of the clandestine message, a craft of immense risk and intoxicating reward. Let your focus return to our young knight, his heart emboldened by the smile his lady granted him at the tournament. He has moved beyond the need for public adoration, and now feels the pull of a more direct, more dangerous communication. You find him not in the armory or the training yard, but in a small borrowed chamber hunched over a rough wooden table. By the flickering light of a single tallow candle, he is composing a letter. This is no simple task. Parchment, made from scraped and treated animal skin, is expensive. Ink, painstakingly mixed from oak galls and iron salts, is precious. And literacy itself is a privilege. Of course, this all presumed both parties could read, which was by no means a given. A misread poem could lead to some very confusing romantic signals. He writes slowly, carefully, his armoured knuckles clumsy with the delicate quill. He is not merely writing words, he is pouring his idealised passion onto the page, crafting a poem that praises her eyes, her grace, her virtue. He compares her to the sun, to a star, to a saint in a stained glass window. He asks for nothing, but implies everything. The letter is a continuation of his worship, but this time it is for her eyes only. Once finished, he does not sign his own name. That would be madness. Instead, he might draw a small, personal symbol, a device only she would recognize. He folds the parchment into a tight, complex bundle. Then comes the most crucial step, the seal. He drips hot, dark wax onto the fold and presses his signet ring into it, leaving an impression. This seal is his signature, his lock, his plea for secrecy. Now, the letter is a physical object, pulsing with potential. It cannot deliver itself. You now become aware of another figure, lingering in the shadows of the corridor, the go-between. In the world of the medieval court, the role of the trusted intermediary was absolutely essential. It might be the lady's loyal maidservant, a page boy who idolizes the knight, or even a sympathetic clergyman who sees the purity in this chaste, ennobling love. Choosing the right messenger was half the battle. You needed someone loyal, discreet, and preferably a fast runner. The knight presses the folded parchment and a small coin into the messenger's hand with a whispered instruction. The fate of his heart is no longer his own. You follow the messenger, a silent ghost in their footsteps. You feel the tension in the air as they navigate the castle's corridors, avoiding the watchful eyes of the steward, the lady's husband, or a rival knight. Every shadow holds a potential threat. If this letter is intercepted, the consequences could be catastrophic. Disgrace for the lady, banishment or worse for the knight, and dismissal for the messenger. Every folded note was a potential scandal. Every wax seal a silent promise of secrecy. This handwritten note, carried for days or mere minutes by a nervous messenger, carried far more weight and terror than a modern read receipt. At last, the letter reaches its destination. You are in the lady's solar, her private chamber. She is surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting, their needles clicking as they work on a tapestry. The messenger enters on some pretext, and in a moment when no one is looking, the note is slipped into her hand. You feel the warmth and crinkle of the parchment in her palm. She must betray nothing. Her face must remain a placid mask of noble indifference. Later, when she is finally alone, she breaks the wax seal, her heart beating a little faster. By candlelight, she reads the knight's words. She feels the warmth of his admiration, a private sunbeam in the cool, dutiful reality of her life. Her decision now is everything. She could burn the letter and pretend it never existed. That would be the safest, most prudent course. Or she could reply. If she does, the entire dangerous, exhilarating cycle begins again, but with the stakes doubled. Now, two people are bound by a secret written on a piece of skin. But letters were only one tool in the craft of secret communication. Love found other, more subtle channels. You see the lady walk through her walled garden. She plucks a specific flower, a red rose for passion, a sprig of lavender for devotion, and leaves it on the stone ledge of a chapel window where she knows her night will pass. The flower is a silent, one-word poem. You witness her in prayer, a beautifully illuminated book of hours open on her lap. She is not reading the Latin prayers, but a passage from the Song of Solomon that she has marked with a silk ribbon, knowing she will forget the book on the pew for him to find. The holy book becomes a vessel for a very worldly message. And then there were the tokens. Not the formal favours for tournaments, but smaller, more intensely personal objects. A knight might carve a small wooden bird and have it passed to his lady. It is a thing of no monetary value, but of immense emotional worth. She might, in return, send back a single thread pulled from her sleeve, or a lock of her hair, concealed within a locket or a small pouch. These tokens were anchors for affection, physical proof that the feeling was reciprocated. They were carried inside armour or sewn into the lining of a dress, secret treasures that could be touched in moments of doubt or loneliness, reminders of the fragile, beautiful connection they were building in the shadows of the court. These small things, a feather, a thread, a folded note, were the true keys to the heart's chambers, far more powerful and more cherished than any lock ever forged from iron, the flickering candlelight of the medieval solar gutters and fades, and in its place you feel the bright, warm wash of Italian sunshine. The heavy scent of wood smoke and damp stone is replaced by the fragrance of cypress trees, blooming citrus, and the faint, briny air of a distant canal. You have drifted forward in time, out of the feudal world and into the heart of the Renaissance. You are in Florence or Venice, a city humming with commerce, art, and a new, intense focus on the individual. But with this new dawn of humanism comes a new kind of prison, one not of stone or iron, but of light and perception. This is the gilded cage of reputation. In the medieval castle, a lady's honour was tied to land and lineage. Here, in the bustling city-states of the Renaissance, it is something more complex, more public, and infinitely more fragile. Honour, in this sunlit world, was as tangible as gold and as fragile as glass. For the wealthy merchant families, the bankers, and the burgeoning new aristocracy, your family's reputation was everything. It was your credit score, your social media profile, and your security system all rolled into one. And the absolute cornerstone of a family's honour was the virtue of its women. You watch as a grand procession moves through the sun-drenched piazza. This is not a column of armed knights, but a wedding party. At its centre is a unique and telling piece of furniture, the cassone, or marriage chest. It is a massive, ornate wooden chest, covered in gold leaf and intricately painted panels, carried on the shoulders of stout serving men. It is being paraded from the home of the bride's father to the palazzo of her new husband, a very public transfer of property. And inside this chest is the dowry, not just coins, but sumptuous fabrics, linens, and all the finery a bride brings to her new life. The dowry in Renaissance Italy had become an astronomical expense, a crippling investment that could make or break a family. Because the financial stake was so high, the bride's virtue was an asset of incalculable worth. But look closer at the paintings on the side of that chest. They are not just decorative. One panel might show the story of Lucretia, the Roman matron who chose death over dishonour. Another might depict Penelope, faithfully weaving and unweaving her tapestry as she awaits her husband's return. These chests were public billboards, advertising the bride's value and serving as a constant, visible reminder of her duty. A woman was expected to be a masterpiece of virtue, as beautifully composed and morally instructive as the paintings on her own marriage chest. You follow the procession to the bride's new home. She is now part of a new family, and her every action reflects on them. Her cage is one of visibility. She cannot simply remain in a private solar, attended by her ladies. She must be seen, but only in the right way, in the right places. Her attendance at church, her posture, the modesty of her gaze, all are subject to public scrutiny. The piazza was the internet of the Renaissance, and gossip travelled faster than a horse-drawn carriage, with far less reliable sources. A rumour, a misinterpreted glance, a moment alone near an open window could be enough to tarnish her honneur and by extension, that of her husband and his entire clan. The secret communications we saw in the medieval court still exist here, but the risks are exponentially higher. That dropped handkerchief, that whispered word from a would-be admirer, they are now performed on a much larger, brighter stage. A secret is harder to keep when your world is a network of interconnected courtyards, loggias and balconies, all designed to see and be seen. The very architecture colludes in this surveillance. You see her, the young bride, standing on a balcony overlooking a canal. She is beautifully dressed in velvets and silks, her hair intricately braided with pearls. She is the picture of wealth and grace. But her expression is one of careful neutrality. She knows she is being watched by neighbours, by servants, by anyone passing in a gondola below. Her husband does not need an iron belt to control her. He has the entire city as his sentinel. Her own awareness of her precarious honour is her constant chaperone. This psychological restraint is perhaps even more effective than a physical one. It is a cage she carries within herself. This intense focus on female chastity was not just about social control. It was a response to the changing world. As men engaged in the cutthroat, morally ambiguous worlds of trade and politics, the home was imagined as a serene, pure sanctuary, and the woman as its guardian angel. Her purity was meant to spiritually balance the moral compromises her husband had to make in the public sphere. She was the keeper of the family's soul. This was an immense burden to place on anyone's shoulders. One can only imagine the silent terror of an innocent woman who becomes the subject of a malicious rumour, or the frantic manoeuvring of a family trying to quell a brewing scandal. An accusation, even if baseless, could ruin a girl's marriage prospects or cast doubt on the legitimacy of her children, unravelling decades of social and financial climbing. While the Renaissance celebrated the glory of the individual, for women, that individuality was often sublimated into a single, all-consuming project, the performance of flawless, unimpeachable virtue. The light of the Renaissance, which produced such breathtaking art and intellectual freedom, could also be a harsh and unforgiving spotlight. And for a woman, stepping into its shadows was a luxury she could rarely afford. The bright, unforgiving sunlight of the Italian piazza softens as you retreat from the public stage. You pass from the noisy courtyard into the cool, quiet interior of a palazzo. The cage of reputation, while powerful, was an external pressure. But what of the inner world? If the iron girdle was a myth, were there no real locks and keys involved in the drama of love, secrecy, and ownership? The answer is yes, but they were far more subtle and far more interesting than a blacksmith's cruel invention. Your attention is drawn back to the magnificent cassone, the marriage chest we saw paraded through the streets. Its painted exterior was a public declaration of virtue. But now you see the bride, in the privacy of her new chambers, lift the heavy lid. It is locked with a large, ornate iron key, which she now wears on a chain at her waist, alongside the keys to the pantry and the linen closets. This set of keys, the chatelaine, is a symbol of her new power and responsibility as mistress of the house. She is not a prisoner, but a guardian, the keeper of the household's wealth and smooth functioning. Inside the chest, among the neatly folded linens and bolts of silk, are smaller, more personal containers. You see a small wooden box, bound in polished steel, with a lock so intricate it looks like a piece of jewellery. What does it hold? Perhaps it contains the very letters of the marriage contract, or her personal accounting. Or perhaps it holds something more private still. A lock of hair from her mother, a cherished memento from a life she has now left behind. Or maybe, just maybe, it holds a secret letter, a folded piece of parchment from a suitor she was forced to refuse, a memory of a love that might have been. The box protects not her body, but her history, her private self. Privacy was a luxury, and like all luxuries, it had to be carefully guarded. You drift into another room, a small study or studiolo. This chamber is a new invention of the age, a quiet space for contemplation, reading and writing. In the centre is a magnificent writing desk. It is a masterpiece of woodworking, inlaid with ivory and exotic woods. And it is a fortress of secrets. You run your hand over its smooth surface and begin to explore its features. You pull open a small drawer, then another. But this is no ordinary piece of furniture. You press a hidden piece of carving, and a false panel slides back with a soft sigh, revealing a secret compartment behind it. Every well-appointed desk had its secrets, a place to hide embarrassing poetry or unpaid bills, proving that some anxieties are timeless. These desks were the personal domains of both men and women of a certain class. Here, a person could manage their affairs and, more importantly, cultivate an inner life away from the prying eyes of the household. It was here that a diary might be kept, its pages filled with thoughts too dangerous to speak aloud. And that diary would be kept in a locked drawer, or even better, in a book designed to look like a prayer book, but which was actually a hollowed-out box. It was the ultimate analog firewall, designed to keep meddling siblings and suspicious spouses out of one's private thoughts. The key becomes the central object in this quiet drama. Not a mythical key to a cruel girdle, but real keys of brass and iron, each with its own purpose and meaning. The symbolic gift of a key was a powerful social custom. When a husband first presented his wife with the chatelaine, it was a public transfer of domestic authority. But a key given in private carried a different, more thrilling meaning. You can imagine a lover, a secret admirer, pressing a small, delicate key into his beloved's hand during a masked ball. It is not the key to her chastity, but perhaps to a secluded garden gate, or a private room where they might speak for a few precious, uninterrupted moments. Being given the keys to the wine cellar was a sign of trust. Being given the key to a private study was a sign of something else entirely. The key becomes a tangible piece of trust, a physical invitation to cross a forbidden threshold. Jewelry also began to reflect this obsession with secrecy and possession. You see a beautiful gold locket hanging around a lady's neck. It is engraved with her husband's initials, a clear sign of ownership. But when she thinks no one is looking, she opens a second, hidden clasp on the locket, revealing a tiny, exquisitely painted miniature of another man's face. The locket is a public declaration of one thing, and a private vessel for another. Padlock and key motifs became popular in bracelets and necklaces, gifts from husbands to wives, or from lovers to the objects of their affection. These were not functional locks, but symbols. They were playful acknowledgements of devotion, a way of saying, "You hold the key to my heart," or, perhaps more possessively, "I hold the key to yours." These real objects, the locked box, the secret compartment, the symbolic key, tell a much richer story than the one-dimensional myth of the chastity belt. They show us people who were not simply brutes and victims, but complex individuals navigating a world that demanded a public face of perfect virtue, while their hearts and minds teemed with private thoughts, memories, and desires. They used technology not to imprison the body, but to carve out small, precious spaces for the self. Control and secrecy were a delicate dance, managed with intricate mechanisms of wood and metal hidden in plain sight. One can only imagine the small, secret smile of a woman as she turns a key in a lock, securing a part of her world that belonged only to her. Beyond the world of locks that guarded secrets and keys that promised access, there was another universe of objects. These were things that did not hide love, but held it. They were not about control or ownership in the same way as a contract or a dowry, but about a different kind of bond, one forged in sentiment and memory. As you drift away from the Renaissance palazzo, you enter a quieter, more personal space, a landscape dotted with small, powerful artifacts, the world of the love token. Let your focus settle on a simple gold band, resting in the palm of your imagined hand. It looks plain from the outside, but as you turn it over, you see a faint inscription etched into the inner surface, the side that would rest against the skin. It reads, "My heart is yours." This is a poesy ring, a tradition stretching from the medieval period into the 18th century. It was a secret message worn in plain sight. The poems, or posies, were short, intimate declarations. "Many are the stars I see, but in my eye, no star but thee," one might read. Or the simple, poignant, "I live in hope." The inscriptions had to be short, which was probably for the best. It forced would-be poets to be concise, a true act of love. The beauty of the poesy ring was its profound privacy. The world saw a simple ring. Only the wearer knew the secret it held, feeling the words against their finger with every movement. Now, you see a young woman, perhaps in the age of Jane Austen, sitting by a window. She is preparing a small packet for her beloved, a naval officer about to set sail on a long and dangerous voyage. Communication will be sporadic at best, a letter taking months to cross the ocean. She needs to give him something that will last, a physical piece of herself to keep him safe. With a small pair of silver scissors, she snips a lock of her own hair. This tradition, giving a lock of hair, is one of the most powerful and personal forms of token. It is literally a part of the giver, an intimate relic that decay cannot touch in the same way as a flower. She carefully braids the strands of hair and encloses them in a locket. He will carry this with him, a tangible reminder of her, a connection that transcends distance and time. As you drift forward into the Victorian era, this custom of hairwork becomes even more elaborate. It seems a bit macabre to us now, weaving jewellery from human hair, but it was the ultimate personal gift. You couldn't get more you than a piece of your own hair unless you gave them a tooth. You see brooches, bracelets, and rings made of incredibly intricate patterns woven from the hair of a loved one. Sometimes it was the hair of a whole family, with different shades braided together to represent each member. It was a way of keeping the family circle complete, even when separated by distance or by death. The jewellery was not just a symbol of a person, it was the person in a very real sense. Then you come across a most curious and intense fashion, the lover's eye miniature. You see a gentleman in the late 18th century gazing at a small brooch pinned to his lapel. Set under a dome of crystal is a tiny, exquisitely painted watercolour. It is not a full portrait, but only an eye gazing out at him. Whose eye is it? Only he and the woman he loves know for sure. This was the appeal of the lover's eye. It was a secret declaration of love, its anonymity making it the perfect token for a clandestine affair or a love that had to be kept hidden from society's view. It was intensely personal, yet perfectly discreet. It allowed a lover to carry the gaze of their beloved with them, a constant, silent communication. Not all tokens were so elaborate. Sometimes, the simplest objects carried the most weight. You see a soldier on a battlefield, reaching into his pocket to touch a single silver coin, bent in the middle. He and his sweetheart each have one half of the coin, a promise to be made whole again one day. You see a young woman opening a book of poetry, and a pressed flower falls from its pages. A forget-me-not, a flower, the Victorians, never ones for subtlety and sentiment, adored for its helpful branding. The flower is now dry and fragile, but the memory of when it was given is still vibrant and alive. A simple ribbon, a smooth stone from a riverbed where two people once walked, a button from a coat. These everyday objects became sacred relics when imbued with the power of memory and affection. It was a way of holding on to a person when all you could really hold was a memory. In a world without photographs, without phone calls or video chats, these tokens were vital. They were not passive reminders. They were active participants in the relationship. A lover might speak to the miniature portrait, or hold the poesy ring while reading a letter, or touch the lock of hair for courage. These objects formed a bridge across the silence and the distance. They were proof that the love was real, that it existed in the physical world, even when the person was absent. One can only imagine the stories these silent objects could tell if they could speak. The bent coins, the locks of hair, the secret eye portraits, they witnessed declarations of love, tearful partings, and joyous reunions. They were held in pockets during storms at sea, clutched in hands during times of fear, and treasured for a lifetime, long after the giver was gone. They were a language of love written not in words, but in things, and in their humble, silent way, they bound hearts together with a strength that no law could mandate and no lock could enforce. The intimate glow of the love token fades, and you feel the atmosphere around you change once more. The air grows heavier, the light dimmer, as if filtered through thick velvet curtains. This world of intense private sentiment, of lovers' eyes and hair-woven brooches, was the flip side of a society defined by overwhelming public restraint. You have now drifted fully into the drawing room of the 19th century, the Victorian age, an era of steam engines and scientific progress, but also one governed by a code of propriety so rigid it has become legendary. You find yourself in a parlour, the heart of a middle-class Victorian home. Every surface is covered. The mantelpiece is crowded with porcelain figures. The tables are draped in heavy cloths, and the windows are swathed in layers of lace and damask, muffling the sounds and sights of the outside world. You feel a sense of constriction in the air itself, an echo of the tightly laced corsets worn by the women, designed to create a fashionable silhouette at the expense of breath and comfort. It was an age that put emotion on a pedestal, and the body in a cage of whalebone and rules. Here, the governing principle was the ideology of separate spheres. Society was divided into two domains: the public sphere of work, commerce, and politics, which was the realm of men, and the private sphere of the home, which was the sacred domain of women. A woman's purpose was to be the angel in the house, a moral compass for her husband and children, a beacon of purity and domestic bliss who kept the corrupting influences of the modern world at bay. This was not a role of passive gentleness. It was an active, demanding job of moral guardianship. With this ideal came a labyrinth of rules governing social interaction, especially courtship. The process was so heavily chaperoned and rule-bound, it's a wonder anyone ever managed to get married at all. It was less of a romance and more of a carefully monitored diplomatic mission. A young man could not simply speak to a young woman he admired. He required a formal introduction from a mutual acquaintance. Once introduced, they could never be alone together. A watchful chaperone, a mother, an aunt, a married older sister, was a constant presence. Conversations were kept light and impersonal. You witnessed the ritual of the calling card. A gentleman would leave his card with a servant at the lady's door. If the family wished to receive him, they would send their own card in return. This was the opening move in a slow, careful chess game of social advancement and romantic potential. A woman's reputation was her most precious asset, and it was fragile. A walk alone with a man, a letter received without her parents' knowledge, even a conversation that was too animated or familiar could lead to gossip and social ruin. This was a culture so famously modest, it would sometimes drape the legs of a piano, lest they be too suggestive. The piano, for its part, remained silent on the matter. It is in this climate of intense social control and repressed anxiety that we can finally understand why the myth of the chastity belt was so enthusiastically revived. As we saw earlier, the Victorians were the ones who forged the artifacts and curated the legend. Now, you can feel why. In a society that went to such extraordinary lengths to control female desire through social convention, the idea of a crude physical lock was a potent fantasy. It was a projection of their own obsessions onto a distant, barbaric past. You can imagine them, the Victorian families, gathered around the fire, reading a romanticized novel by Sir Walter Scott, or a visitor returning from a museum, speaking in hushed, horrified tones of the Florentine girdle they had seen. The story of the crusader locking up his wife resonated with them not because it was historically true, but because it felt emotionally true to their own anxieties. It was a gothic, thrilling tale that allowed them to explore their deepest fears about infidelity and loss of control in a safe historical context. For the Victorians, the chastity belt was the perfect historical artifact. It was shocking. It confirmed their belief in their own moral progress. And best of all, it was someone else's problem. By pointing to this imagined relic of the Dark Ages, they could congratulate themselves on how far they had come. Their own methods of control, the chaperones, the calling cards, the corsets, the crushing weight of public opinion, seemed gentle and civilized by comparison. The myth served a vital purpose. It made their own gilded cage feel like a sanctuary. So the forgeries were crafted in workshops. The fantastic stories were printed in books, and the objects were placed in museums under incorrect labels. They were not just curiosities, they were pillars supporting the Victorian sense of self. The iron girdle was a dark mirror. In it, they saw a reflection of their own fears about the untamable nature of human desire. A desire they were trying so desperately to channel, to manage, and to contain within the starched, veiled confines of their own particular world. The myth's endurance says almost nothing about the medieval lady, but it tells you everything you need to know about the secret heart of the angel in the house, the thick, velvet curtains of the Victorian parlour part, and you step out of the quiet, constrained space of the home and into the dazzling brilliance of a grand ballroom. The air, once heavy with propriety, is now alive with music from a string orchestra. The scent of beeswax polish on the floors, and the collective murmur of 100 conversations. But human connection, like water, will always find a way through the cracks. In a world where words were so heavily policed, where a young man and woman were never truly alone, how did they speak of the heart's true desires? You're about to witness the answer in a silent, secret language written on the air itself. Your gaze is drawn to a young woman standing near a potted palm. Her chaperone, a formidable aunt in a turban, sits nearby, her eyes scanning the room. The young woman is beautiful, but it is the object in her hand that holds your attention. An exquisite fan, made of painted silk and carved ivory sticks. In this setting, the fan is not merely an instrument for creating a breeze. It is a tool of communication, a transmitter of secret messages. The ballroom was a battlefield of hearts, and the fan was its most elegant and deadly weapon. A handsome young man, with whom she danced a polite, chaperoned waltz earlier, catches her eye from across the room. A silent conversation begins. He raises his eyebrows slightly. A question. She responds. She gently touches her closed fan to her right cheek. In the complex and often romanticized language of the fan, this simple gesture means yes. He smiles, almost imperceptibly. He takes a step toward her, but another, less desirable suitor approaches her first. The young woman, wanting to warn her preferred gentleman away for the moment, swiftly places the fan against her left ear. The message, "Do not betray our secret." He understands and retreats into the crowd. This silent dialogue was a game of immense subtlety, played out in full view of a society that forbade open flirtation. While many of the intricate fan dictionaries, published in the 18th and 19th centuries, were likely clever marketing ploys by fan makers, the use of the fan for basic signaling was a genuine social skill. You almost needed a user manual to navigate a conversation, where a flutter could mean anything from "I adore you" to "You're blocking the view of the champagne." The undesirable suitor is now bowing before her, asking for the next dance. She cannot refuse without causing offense. But as she agrees, she snaps her fan closed with a sharp, definitive click. Her suitor takes this as a sign of her enthusiasm. But her true beloved, watching from afar, knows the real meaning. "I wish I were not engaged to you." Later, during a pause in the music, she sees him again. She wants him to approach, to find a way to speak with her. She slowly begins to draw the fan across her eyes. The signal is clear. "I am sorry." Then, she lets the fan rest on her right cheek once more, before carrying it in her right hand in front of her face. The message is a thrilling invitation. "Follow me." All these secret signals were, of course, conducted under the watchful eye of the chaperone, who was presumably either blissfully unaware, politely pretending to be, or a former grandmaster in the art herself. One shudders to think of the romantic mishaps caused by an accidental twitch of the wrist or a poorly aimed fan snap. A declaration of eternal love misinterpreted as a request for a glass of punch. The fan was not the only tool in this arsenal of silent communication. You notice a lady drop her white lace handkerchief. It seems like an accident, but as a gentleman rushes to retrieve it, you see the faint smile on her face. Dropping the handkerchief was a classic, almost theatrical invitation to begin a conversation. But the language of the handkerchief could be more complex. Drawing it across the lips meant, "I desire your acquaintance." Twisting it in the left hand could mean, "I wish to be rid of you," a brutal but silent dismissal. Even gloves held their own vocabulary. To a gentleman, a dropped glove was a challenge, either to a duel or to his affections. For a lady, turning a glove inside out was a sign of contempt, while holding them loosely in the hand could signal an easy, agreeable nature. These were not rigid, universally understood codes, but rather a fluid set of gestures that could be deployed by a savvy social navigator to express nuances of feeling that spoken words could not. In this glittering, crowded room, you are watching dozens of these tiny dramas unfold. It is a world of breathtaking subtlety. Here, control is not maintained by an iron lock, but by a web of unspoken rules. And freedom is not found in open rebellion, but in the mastery of the secret languages that flourish within those rules. The fan, the glove, the handkerchief, they are instruments of agency, They allow these women, so often portrayed as passive and powerless, to become active players in the game of courtship. They can invite, dismiss, encourage, and warn, all with the flick of a wrist. It is a form of power that is quiet, discreet, and devastatingly effective. The rustle of a silk fan could be louder and more meaningful than any shouted declaration, a secret whispered on a current of air for an audience of one. The glitter of the ballroom fades, but the memory of its secret languages lingers. You have seen the tools of silent communication, the fan and the glove, wielded like weapons in a game of hearts. But what happens when these fleeting gestures, these silent conversations in a crowded room, are not enough? What happens when a woman decides to use the very rules designed to constrain her as tools to build the life she truly desires? You are about to witness such a story, a quiet rebellion fought not with swords, but with calling cards, feigned illnesses, and impeccable timing. Let your mind conjure a heroine for our story. We will call her Eleonora. She is the daughter of a respectable family with a good name, but dwindling finances. As such, she has been promised in marriage to a man of impeccable lineage and considerable fortune, a Lord Ashworth, whose primary romantic attribute is that he is solvent. He is 20 years her senior, perpetually dull, and considers her little more than a pretty and well-bred addition to his estate. Eleonora, however, has a secret. Her heart belongs to another, a Mr. Davies, a young man with a passion for poetry, a brilliant mind, and a future that is far from certain. They have exchanged letters, tokens, a silent language of their own. But her duty is clear. The contract is all but signed. You see her in her family's parlour during one of Lord Ashworth's formal visits. She is the picture of demure obedience. She pours the tea. She speaks when spoken to, her eyes modestly downcast. But as you watch closer, you see the brilliant, calculating mind working behind the placid facade. She knows she cannot simply refuse the marriage. That would create a scandal, shame her family, and ruin her own reputation, making a match with even Mr. Davies impossible. She cannot break the cage. So, she must convince her jailer to open the door for her himself. Her plan required the cunning of a general, the patience of a saint, and the acting skills of a stage tragedian. Her campaign begins with subtlety. She knows Lord Ashworth prides himself on his robust health and cheerful, uncomplicated view of the world. So, Eleonora begins to cultivate a delicate, artistic melancholy. During his visits, she might let him discover a book of sombre poetry left open on a table. When he asks her what she enjoys, she speaks of long, contemplative walks, the beauty of a windswept moor, and the soulful music of a cello. He wants a hostess for his lavish parties. She presents him with a creature of deep, romantic, and frankly exhausting sensitivity. Next, she begins to manipulate the very system of chaperonage designed to control her. Her official chaperone is her mother, but she often contrives to be accompanied on walks or visits by her younger, far more complicit sister, Clara. It is on one of these chance encounters, carefully orchestrated by a series of letters between Clara and Mr. Davies, that Lord Ashworth, riding in the park, comes upon them. He sees Eleonora speaking with Mr. Davies. The conversation is perfectly innocent, with Clara standing just a few feet away. But Lord Ashworth sees the light in Eleonora's eyes, a vibrancy he has never witnessed in her conversations with him. He sees Mr. Davies's rapt attention. There is nothing he can object to, but the seed of jealousy has been planted. The game continues. At a musicale, Eleonora uses her fan not to invite Mr. Davies closer, but to signal a shared joke, a fleeting moment of connection, that excludes her fiancé completely. She develops a series of convenient headaches that prevent her from attending parties she knows Lord Ashworth particularly wants her to grace. She pens him beautiful letters, full of filial duty and respect, but also hinting at a fragile constitution and a spirit perhaps too fine for the rigours of public life. She is building a case brick by brick that she is not the wife he wants. She is making herself, in the most polite and virtuous way possible, entirely unsuitable. She learned that the bars of her cage could also be used as rungs on a ladder. The climax of her campaign is a masterpiece of passive aggression. Lord Ashworth has commissioned a portrait of her. During the sittings, she holds a single white lily, a symbol of purity, but also of funerals. Her expression is one of tragic, ethereal sadness. When the portrait is unveiled, it is beautiful, but it is the portrait of a saintly martyr, not a vibrant country wife. It is the final straw for Lord Ashworth. He is a simple man who wanted a simple, cheerful wife, not a complex, poetic, and perpetually tired-looking woman who made him feel unintelligent. You are a silent witness in the parlour when he finally comes to speak with her father. He breaks the engagement. He does so with a great show of regret, stating that he could not, in good conscience, subject a woman of Miss Eleonora's delicate sensibilities and fragile health to the demands of his station. He is the perfect gentleman, and she is the perfect victim. To the outside world, she is the poor, jilted girl. Sympathy pours in. Her reputation is not only intact, it is enhanced by a romantic tragedy. And who is there to console her in her heartbreak? The ever-faithful Mr. Davies, who, with her family's pitying approval, is allowed to visit and read her poetry, to offer his steadfast friendship. After a suitable period of mourning for her lost engagement, her parents, simply wanting to see their daughter happy at last, consent to a marriage with the less advantageous but clearly devoted Mr. Davies. Eleonora has won. She did not shatter the system. She mastered it, using its own absurd rules of reputation, propriety, and feminine frailty to achieve her own secret, romantic end. Eleonora's story fades, a satisfying melody of a victory won in a world of veils and whispers. And as her quiet triumph recedes into the soft mists of the past, you find yourself drifting forward, through the decades, back towards the familiar glow of your own time. The journey is almost over. You have travelled from imagined medieval dungeons to Victorian drawing rooms, from Renaissance palazzos to glittering ballrooms. You have seen that the iron chastity belt was a phantom, a myth. The real cages were built of duty, reputation, and unspoken rules. And the real keys were found in secret letters, silent gestures, and the clever manipulations of the human heart. But as you settle back into the present moment, a final question surfaces. Why are we still so captivated by these stories? The answer, perhaps, is that the locks and keys are no longer made of iron, but of pixels and passwords. The anxieties are the same. We may not have crusading knights carrying keys to iron girdles, but we have couples who share their locations 24/7, which is arguably more invasive and definitely worse for your phone battery. The fear of the unknown, the desire to secure a partner's fidelity, has not vanished. It has simply migrated online. The modern chastity belt is the constant, low-level surveillance we can now perform on each other through social media, checking tagged photos, reading comments, noting who likes whose posts, seeing that tiny green dot that says they are active now. Think of the medieval marriage contract, a pragmatic joining of land and lineage where love was a secondary concern. Do we not have our own modern versions? The pressure to have a relationship that is Instagram official, to perform the role of a happy, successful couple for a digital audience, can sometimes feel like a contract of its own. We still present our unions for public approval. Only the heraldic banners have been replaced by carefully chosen photo albums and witty captions. We still idealize our beloveds in the tradition of courtly love. Only now the pedestal is an online profile, curated to show them in the best possible light, preferably on vacation and with perfect teeth. And what of the secret languages? The fan, the handkerchief, the clandestine letter carried by a nervous messenger. Have they disappeared, or have they simply transformed? You know the feeling. The agony of waiting for a reply to a risky text is our modern version of the night's beautiful suffering, just with less poetry and more screen glare. We have entire unwritten dictionaries of meaning attached to the length of a reply, the use of punctuation, the choice of a specific emoji. A message ending with a period can feel like a cold dismissal. A seen notification with no reply can feel like a public shaming. These are our new unspoken rules, our modern language of the fan, conducted with thumbs on a screen. The Renaissance obsession with onore, the gilded cage of a reputation so fragile that a single rumour in the piazza could shatter it, feels startlingly familiar. The piazza is now global. A misplaced comment, an old photograph taken out of context, a story told by a disgruntled ex-partner can spread across the world in minutes. The fear of being publicly shamed, of having your reputation destroyed by digital gossip, is a powerful cage that dictates how we present ourselves to the world. We are all curators of our own cassone, our own public image, painting panels of virtuous posts and happy moments to be paraded through the feeds of our friends and followers. Even Eleonora's quiet rebellion has its modern echo. We still look for ways to subvert the systems we find ourselves in. We navigate the complex rules of modern dating, deciding when to be vulnerable, when to be guarded, how to present ourselves on a dating app to attract the right person while warding off the wrong ones. We learn to read between the lines of a profile, to interpret the subtext of a message, to play the game. We still seek to find our own Mr. Davies in a world that often seems to expect us to settle for a Lord Ashworth. The truth is, these historical tales resonate because they are not just about the past. They are about us. They are about the timeless, fundamental human dramas of love, trust, jealousy, and the desperate, enduring need for connection. They reassure us that our own anxieties are not new, that for centuries, people have struggled with the same hopes and fears, just in different costumes. They found ways to love, to communicate, to survive, and even triumph within the constraints of their time. And in their stories, we find a mirror to our own, a quiet whisper across the centuries, telling us that the human heart will always find a way. And so, our journey through the sleepy history of love and control comes to a gentle close. The image of the iron girdle, once so stark and menacing, has dissolved, replaced by a far more nuanced tapestry of silk fans, sealed letters, and secret smiles. The dust motes dancing in the imagined museum have settled. The light from the high window has softened into a peaceful twilight, and the great heavy book of history is slowly closing. Let the stories of the past, with their whispers of courtly love and their clever, quiet rebellions, become a soft background murmur, a gentle rhythm to guide you toward your own deep and restorative rest. There are no more rules to decipher, no more codes to learn, only the simple, profound peace of this present moment. Let your mind drift on the quiet currents of the night, releasing today's thoughts and embracing the calm stillness that awaits you in your dreams. Settle in now and allow yourself to float away on the gentle tide of sleep.